Well, folks, this is no shock. According to voting rights activists and civil rights groups, South Carolina should postpone its elections until the Supreme Court decides on the congressional maps a lower court already deemed unconstitutional. Yet the courts are allowing these maps to be used, which makes no sense whatsoever. John Cusick is an attorney with the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund. He joins us right now. So John, here's what's crazy. Help me out. When was this lawsuit filed?
We filed the initial lawsuit in 2021, amended it in 2022. It's been almost 2 years.
Filed in 2021, amended in 2022. When did the courts declare that the maps were unconstitutional and they hurt black voters?
January 6, 2023.
January 6, 2023. Yep. So then it goes to Supreme Court. Supreme Court hears it when?
October 11th, 2023. And we asked for an expedited schedule because both us and the defendants asked for a decision by January 1st, 2024.
So let's be clear. You and the defendants said, hey, Supreme Court, could y'all please decide this case by January 1, so if the maps have to redrawn, there's enough time to do so in time for the primaries, right?
That's exactly right, because as you know, sometimes states will invoke this principle to say, we don't have enough time to draw new maps, but there was a recognition of the urgency that to have enough time to put a map. And there was, as you said, it's not always common that both sides are on the same page, but this was a joint request made back in May of 2023.
And we're familiar with that because Louisiana passed maps 2022. Their primary wasn't until August. It was way enough time, but the Supreme Court, after declaring unconstitutional, said, hold up, not enough time. It was like, actually it is. Alabama, exact same thing. So we've seen this before. And so this Supreme Court decides to take its sweet ass time issuing a ruling when, I'm sorry, it's just 9 of you. It ain't that many cases. This Supreme Court could have easily rendered a decision in time to meet the deadline both of y'all asked for.
That's exactly right. You know, this case is so clear and straightforward. It applies binding Supreme Court precedent of just 2017 in a case Cooper v. Harris, where it has very similar factual analogies. Here in South Carolina, they used their power during the redistricting process to exile more than 30,000 Black Charlestonians out of Congressional District 1 into Congressional District 6. And when the map maker was up on the stand, the only thing he could say that there was some sort of common community of interest was an interstate highway all the way to the city of Columbia. And to do so, they targeted Charleston County, where all the other principles that they had applied in the other 46 counties, or the other 45 counties in South Carolina and the other congressional districts, he admitted they abandoned when they were drawing this map. And so they set this racial target to keep it there. To implement that racial target, they abandoned these traditional redistricting principles that had guided all their work. And you see this tremendous disparity of almost 30,000 Black Charlestonians moved out of Congressional District 1 for no reason.
So the phrase that we often hear is called cracking and packing. And so really what happened here, they were like, yo, let's move these 30,000 black people over to Clyburn's district, out of Nancy Mace's district, which made it easier for the Republicans to win. So by moving the black folks out.
Yeah, so they essentially, not during the legislative session, they didn't say that we were doing this for partisan reasons. Even the lead sponsor during the debate said this is not a partisan gerrymander. Then, unfortunately, what has come all too common is that during the litigation strategy after discovery is they start saying this is a political reason. We're doing this for partisan reasons. And, you know, this is unfortunately a American tradition where you see whatever parties in power invoke partisanship as a guise to target Black and brown voters. But the Constitution is clear that partisanship to discriminate. It's crystal clear that for redistricting purposes, even though you might be able to have partisanship as a goal, you can't do so by targeting and using race in an excessive way as a means even to achieve a legitimate outcome. And that's exactly what happened here. We had expert, unrebutted evidence that showed even when you account for voters of the same party, Black and white voters, Black voters are more likely, even when they're in the same party, to be moved out. And so race, not partisan affiliation, was the only thing to explain this movement, and in a way where it was the predominant reason.
So if the Supreme Court drops a decision on Monday, it's too late for the fall.
Well, right now what happened is the lower court, the district court today, said essentially that maps can stay in place for 2024, both the primary and the general election. Now, it's odd that you talked about timing here. The defendants were on notice since February 4th, 2023, that they could not go forward with any maps under Congressional District 1. And the court was also clear at that same time that if for some reason the appellate process and the pending appeal weren't decided by that, they still could not go forward in that. And so you would think that by January 1st, when the Supreme Court didn't issue a decision, defendants would seek to move again for a stay to say keep the maps in place. That didn't happen. Didn't happen in all of January. Didn't happen in February. They waited 9 days before the qualifying deadline for candidates began to seek a stay. And then they moved the Supreme Court, while the district court did not issue a decision, to stay the entire map, even if it's affirmed. And so right now we're in the process of assessing and evaluating that. But that's essentially what's happening right now, is that under the district court's order, maps and this unconstitutional map, even if the Supreme Court affirms, will be in place for the 2024 election.
I mean, it just feels like the Supreme Court is essentially putting his thumb on the scale and helping out. And we saw what happened again in 2022. If they had allowed those maps in Louisiana and Alabama to be changed, Democrats could have likely held onto the House, because that's how razor thin these margins are.
And that's exactly right. These have national implications. And for our voters and the clients that we represent, and the Black voters, the racial gerrymandering harm is clear and immediate. It's impact about everyday life. It's who's being represented. Will those representatives talk about everyday issues, from infrastructure to roads to bridges? And, this is one of the big things of why Charleston, with the significant Black population, advocated to be maintained together as a community of interest, because representatives need to be responsive to those needs. They need to represent those candidates. And here, to the point you mentioned earlier, Roland, they were intentionally cracked to split up and prevent community members from advocating, from aggregating their voices in a way that those folks could not only be held accountable, but for representatives who could be mindful and responsive to the needs of Black community members in Congressional District 1.
All right, then. John Cusick, we appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Greg, on my Washington Watch show years ago, Cornell Belcher, the pollster, said to Black people, hey, we need to be looking at congressional representation a different way. He said from the 1960s through the early 2000s, it was about let's get as many Black members of Congress as possible. He said that's not actually maximizing our power. Cornell said then, and this was 10, 15 years ago, that we need to be looking at sacrificing some of our votes in these Black districts with a heavily Black population to then impact other districts. And that's what Republicans don't want. What they want to do is they want to put as many Black people together as possible. That's what happened in Alabama. They just put all the Black folks in one, and they were like, there needs to be a second district. And Alabama's like, shit. So because Alabama, there was one Black member of Congress, one Democrat. Well, now they guaranteed to have two. Louisiana, same thing. So what a lot of Black folks don't realize, depending upon our numbers, we're impacting a district. And matter of fact, in Texas, they specifically targeted Congressman Martin Frost's district, decimated his district, moved Black people out, and that actually hurt a number of white Democrats across the South. That was their strategy to target. And for Black people, I'm sorry, we vote Democrat. So when Republicans control the House, we don't have power.
Absolutely. I mean, and you did right when you mentioned to John Cusick, the whole concept of cracking and packing. And of course, they know that. The lawyers know that. Reverend Barber says this all the time. When we vote our numbers, we win. Coalition politics are important. What we're seeing here is not unusual. If you listen to the oral arguments in the Alexander case, then probably what's going to happen is that this white nationalist Supreme Court is going to say that they can't intervene because it's not a racial gerrymander, it's a political one. They're going to buy that lie. Following in the line of the cases in Wisconsin, the Whitcomb case, and other cases where they're saying, this is Justice McConnell Gorsuch, who would say this is a political issue, among others. But what you're raising, though, Roland, to the more important point that you've raised, this fundamental point, is that we have to begin to think about politics differently. Ironically, more like we used to think about it before the last couple of generations of elected officials. Meaning that, and when you look at the North Carolina cases, Shaw versus Reno, look at the Ashcroft case in Georgia, the debate has always been about, do you put a bunch of black people in one district, or do you distribute black people in appreciable numbers across districts to have a plurality to be able to influence who gets elected? Nancy Mace, that incompetent, illiterate, white nationalist clown out of South Carolina, is in a safer district now. Now, if you put more black people in her district, she's going to either have to change her politics or hope we don't come out to vote. And I'll end with this. Even with these ridiculous numbers, these super majorities in the white nationalist South behind the cotton curtain, if everybody who is eligible to vote would register to vote, check their registration, and go in and vote, even with all the roadblocks being put in our way, there would be a different map in the South, gerrymandering notwithstanding.
Yep.
And that is a strategy that would come from the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. Sometimes you got to look backward to go forward. Our ancestors didn't let them stop them, and we shouldn't let these people stop us.
Lauren, this is a lazy Supreme Court, and this is the right-wing Supreme Court knowing exactly what they're doing. They could have easily decided this case by the January 1st deadline.
Yeah, well, the strategy so often is delay, 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 delay. I mean, we see that all the time. They love to have the delay strategy. They just will keep having the conversation, keep having the meeting, talking about it, and all the while they will be controlling the game in the background. So delay is a major part of the strategy. The other problem with this situation is that you do have a lot of black elected officials who do not necessarily want the districts to be distributed more evenly, because it's easier, obviously, to run in a district that is coming in at, over 50% black. So there's been arguments that I've seen in certain states where the black elected officials did not necessarily want to have two black districts, because when you have the one black district, obviously, it's really easy to run. But one of the untold stories of the Congressional Black Caucus is that there are so many districts now that are not even close to being majority black, that black lawmakers are winning in. And, it's people like Emmanuel Cleaver and Andre Carson. And, you're getting these more Latino districts in California, Maxine Waters' district, Barbara Lee's district. So a lot of these black members of Congress, on the federal level, a lot of these black members of Congress are winning districts that are not all that black. And the party doesn't really want to talk about that a whole lot. They want to nominate who they want to nominate, but you'd be surprised how many times you see it in the state level where a lot of the black state legislators do not necessarily want to create more black districts. They want to create a blacker district that is easier to win in,
Yep.
and so they don't have to campaign as much.
Yep.
So
Reese?
there's that.
Well, I think that there is a disciplined, active strategy to disenfranchise black voters and to dilute our votes. And if you can do it by appearing to be hands off while actually tipping the scales, then why not? I mean, the Supreme Court is an illegitimate institution, and they have tried every tactic. Sometimes it's outright gutting protections that have been there, and sometimes it's pretending to be hands off. But they do this shit every single election cycle, whether it's the district courts or whatever courts, where they say, oh, sorry, time has run out, gotta stick with these racist ass maps. And it just keeps repeating the cycle over and over and over again. But the reality is that we have to vote at least our capacity. And if we could do that, maybe we can't influence individual districts, but we can start to move the needle at least at the statewide level and make it more of a political penalty to do these kinds of gerrymandering activities in these states. And when we don't, then we end up with like the Jeff Landrys and the unconscionable things that he's doing now in Louisiana to further erode the citizenship of Black people in that state. And so, we have these conversations about gerrymandering and maps and things of that nature, but until we even flex our might at the state level and at the federal level, they're going to keep being able to do whatever they want to do with their supermajorities, the Republican courts, and the courts with too many damn Republicans that Trump McConnell put on the bench.
Fanbase is pioneering a new era of social media and investment. This next generation social app has already raised $10 million and has just opened a new round to invest. For details on how to invest, visit startengine.com/fanbase or scan the QR code. Another way we're giving you the freedom to be you without limits.